Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, kia rana, malola lei, namaste, ni hao. Look, I've just come from a major education announcement in Auckland where I've been talking to a group of young children. And I would have loved to have been with you this morning, but I was with the Honourable Heke Parada making that announcement, and I was trying to work out actually if there was any way to weave in how that announcement could be beneficial for civil defence. And the only thing I can say to you is that it's 150 million for buildings in Auckland, and many of them are civil defence centres, so you never know. Look, can I just acknowledge some people in the room? I do want to acknowledge our Director of the Ministry of Civil Defence and Emergency Management, Norm Sarah Stewart-Black. She's doing an outstanding job, and I want to just give you an example of that. Last week with the budget, we were very pleased to get what is a 20% increase in the civil defence budget for New Zealand. It's one of the largest increases we've ever had. MCDEM will be going from 42 to 52 staff. And that would not have happened without the very strong advocacy of Norm. I personally went to the Prime Minister. MCDEM obviously sits in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, but it sort of shows the mana that Norm has, that she had the full support of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet in terms of that budget bid. So I do just want to acknowledge you. There are lots of other people in the room as well. Generally, can I just acknowledge, I think actually we do have the Manawatu Mayor. Margaret, where are you? Are you somewhere here? Or she may be, or she is here. And then Councillor Park, and then all of you, I know some of you from central government, local government. We've got people in science, we've got people in health. I do want to as well acknowledge Said Fazal, the Director of ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance Centre. So the first thing I'd like to say is thank you. Thank you for what you do. I get across New Zealand as much as possible with 4 portfolios. I try to visit civil defence teams when I can. But what I would say to you is, regardless of whether I'm in visiting the teams, it's not uncommon that I will be walking through an airport or walking along the street and I will have someone in civil defence come up and talk to me. And I know firsthand now, from being in the role for several years, that the work that many of you do, not only when there is an event, but also just generally in the community, so thank you very much. Look, I thought what I'd do, last year I gave you a bit of a snapshot, obviously just covering off what we've been doing in terms of strengthening our civil defence system. I'm going to recap slightly around the pieces of work that are underway, and then I just want to give you kind of a bit of a teaser around some other pieces that we have been working on and that you can expect to be front of centre, particularly over the next year. So the first thing is, obviously in terms of the National Civil Defence Emergency Management Plan, that's been several years in the making. I'm really pleased with where that's got to, and there's been a lot of people that have been involved in that. It obviously incorporates the recommendations out of the independent review. I think the actual revision of the plan involved 70 local and national agencies. But it's really important, and it's really what I would call a key piece of infrastructure in terms of our civil defence system. I released in the last year an update around those 100 recommendations out of Canterbury. And the thing that I'd say is, I've said, look, we've pretty much done most of them, but some of the pieces in there do require what I think a continued focus. I mean, to give you an example, if we look at the area of welfare responsiveness and the work that's gone into supporting many of our most vulnerable, I do think there are opportunities in the future, particularly if you look at what the government's doing around the social investment approach. We know more than ever before where many of our most vulnerable live, and I think we can take it to another level in terms of planning to support those people in the event of an emergency. So that's just one example whereby, yes, we've done a huge amount around those recommendations, but I think we can go even further. And now that MCDEM is strengthened, I think we have the ability to be able to actually carry that workload. Obviously, there's a huge amount of work going on around risk reduction. I have a very good relationship with Minister Smith in terms of some of the RMA reform that is in train. Some of you will be aware of the specific provisions around natural hazards and the changes that are occurring there. But I think the comment that I would make about that, and again, this is about looking to the future, we have been having some conversations at a ministerial level, totally separate to the work that's come out of Sendai, around risk reduction, which really says there are definitely some vulnerable parts of New Zealand whereby we know that continued events occur. I've stood on the banks of the Waitotra Valley. There are parts of New Zealand where, if you looked back in time, you would never have built particular communities there. And I think the conversation that we're having, and we know how complex and how sensitive it is what does the model then look like for change? And who leads that? You've got, in some situations, even if you look at a community like Franz Joseph, you've got 6 to 7 ministers, a range of different agencies. But I think what I can say to you is you should watch this space, because we are very focused about how do we coordinate those community conversations and enable that change to happen in a much more streamlined way, and how do we be a bit more innovative about that? Can I just acknowledge as well, you did have Sir Ray Avery this morning. I've heard him speak many times, but I think, again, if we're thinking about the future of our civil defence system, encouraging us to think in different ways, whether it is in the area of risk reduction in terms of communities, or whether it is in new technologies and science to be able to strengthen our system. At a legislative level, I think last year I said to you, we have now obviously released the bill that focuses on particularly small to moderate scale emergencies around recovery. What I can say to you is that's tracking pretty well through the parliamentary process. I expect that it will come back to the Parliament, to the floor of the Parliament in August. Can I acknowledge all of the work of everybody who's been involved in that? I know that some of the groups have submitted as well. As much as possible, we're trying to take on board the feedback that has occurred. But I see that that legislation will pass sort of by the end of this year. A couple of observations around it. I'm really hoping that there is really good cross-party support. I'm expecting there will be. I think the only sort of thing that I am flagging that I think is a bit more challenging in terms of the conversations that will come after this legislation comes through the Parliament is that issue of national emergencies and recovery. So we flagged, we were taking this bill through the Parliament that really dealt with small to moderate. There are obviously provisions in there that deal with national recovery, but that we've signalled we're going to have another piece of legislation. And what does that mean, and what have I said publicly about that? Well, what I've said is I don't ever want our Parliament to be in a situation that we were in with Canterbury, that we had to create a completely new agency. I think we are leading the world in this area. I recently was in Canada dealing with a range of my portfolios, and I sat down with a Minister of State to discuss civil defence emergency management. She was very interested in what we're doing, and I think I wouldn't underestimate that the world is watching, particularly around the recovery area and what we are doing, those whole conversations about how you might create a legislative framework in the event of national emergencies that walks that fine line of enabling there to be as much, if you like, calmness of decision makers and leaders because they know that there's enough infrastructure there that can be up and running, versus not being overly prescriptive and tying the hands of the good people on the ground like yourselves. So watch this space in terms of that second phase of recovery. In terms of other areas, Norm and I have had a number of conversations, as I have had with many of you, around this long-standing issue of New Zealanders not being adequately aware or prepared. Now, many of you will know what those figures are, that we're more aware than we are actually prepared, that even out of Canterbury, and we've tracked all of those numbers, that while people had a greater amount of awareness, we've still got a way to go as a nation to really penetrate right through into the community around public awareness in terms of particular events and translating that into action. And so MCDEM have been working hard around a bit of a refreshed public education campaign. I've been testing them pretty hard in terms of social media and other areas. I think the Waikato Civil Defence Group here, there's definitely some innovation occurring across New Zealand in this space. But I think that whole issue of not only what is the communication medium, but what is the social science behind how people will be aware and how people will then translate that into action is going to be more and more an increasing focus. The other area, and I'm making a very small announcement today, but the other area that I've been very focused on, and in part as Associate Minister of Education and Youth, but does also relate to preparedness and awareness, is this issue of young people and how we may get them more involved in our civil defence system, but also how we may get them more involved in leading campaigns in terms of public awareness. And I'm announcing today it's $150,000, $50,000 for a contestable fund for youth and civil defence. We're going to be very open-minded about what initiatives come out of that, but I have said it can be anything from volunteering initiatives to public preparedness campaigns to other innovations in the civil defence space. So I think that's a really positive announcement. I'm expecting that we will ensure that we have probably at least 100 young people involved in that particular initiative. The other initiative that I am announcing that we are doing another round on is the Youth and Emergency Services program. So you can expect 10 more communities to have that program invested in. And I mean, this has been quite an amazing innovation. It actually came from my Ministry of Youth Development and a young man on the ground there called Blair. And what we're seeing is just so many benefits. We've got a number of small towns in New Zealand where they do sometimes struggle to have volunteers. And then we've got a whole lot of young people for which sometimes we struggle to find things for them to be involved in and have youth development opportunities. But also, we are finding that these young people are becoming champions of our emergency services and our civil defence system. And so I'm really looking to enhance that program and expand it where possible in my capacity as Minister of Youth Development. But also this contestable fund is really about saying, how do we create a whole other cohort of people separate to your good selves that might become champions of civil defence but also work in the area in the future. A final couple of pieces that I want you to be aware of, and some of you will have a fair amount of knowledge about, but that we are working on, is this issue of major threats to New Zealand and how do we, one, ensure that we have greater visibility of them, but also ensure that we have additional investment in terms of exercise and training. So Shakeout has been a wild success. Thank you for all of you who have been involved in that. But this year we will be, in August and September, focused on exercise tangaroa. So that will mean that, and we already have a range of agencies that are involved obviously in planning for that, but that is really around our tsunami exercise. And that leads me on to sort of the final area which some of you will have heard me speak about before, and that is really this issue of new technologies and early warning. And I don't want to give too much away, but I can say that we are very far progressed in this area. some of the challenges that we've had, because I've previously said, look, there's a project around public alerting. We've been working through a business case. Is not only working through the practical implementation of something like that. How does it work in terms of people's cell phones? What does it look like? Who will actually be reached in terms of parts of coverage of New Zealand? What does it mean at a behavioural level? What is the right level of threshold in terms of alert? You will have seen across the world there's lots of different examples, and I recently was with ministers from Australia down in Queenstown, and they were telling me their stories around public alerting, both around the costs but also the implementation and how it actually works in practice. So that's a really big piece of work, but look, I think I'm feeling very positive about where that's at. So that's something else that should be on your radar over the coming year. So I think, as you can see, there's a lot going on. Again, I'm very grateful for everything that you do. I wish that I could spend more time with you in various communities. It just sometimes is a bit challenging with 4 portfolios. But I think the director and I, Norm, have a number of conversations, and I see her schedule. I mean, she's out and about with you guys. And I think, I leave you sort of with this final point, which is a challenge that I put to you, and I know you've got the great debate tomorrow night. We've always been world leading in terms of civil defence because we've got a devolved system. We know that Canterbury, out of extraordinary tragedy, comes innovation, has come quite a significant amount of investment and change in both our legislative framework but also our system. And we've now got these significant initiatives ahead of us, both in terms of, I think, public education, potentially public alerting, legislative change around recovery. And we're having MCDEM in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. They are pushing the boundaries and challenging the way that we are not just focused as a nation on natural hazards, but we're looking at every single different threat, from bioterrorism to food safety to pandemics. And the challenge is, how do we communicate that to the nation? How do we communicate this change where they may have had a view of civil defence that is dramatically different, in my view? And this debate that you're going to have about branding, I'm very interested in, because I actually think there's a really good story to tell about the work that has gone on from multiple agencies, from multiple civil defence teams, to this quite aggressive work plan. And I think there is potential to consider some form of change of branding. And I think we wouldn't be doing it for the sake of it. We would want to consider it very carefully. But if we could do it in a way that would awaken New Zealanders' minds to civil defence, but also to be more prepared, to be more aware, then that would be a very beautiful thing. So, look, it's an exciting time to be in civil defence. I love being the Minister for Civil Defence. It is a life-changing role. I often say to the Prime Minister, I can never play up, unlike other ministers, but I'm always available. But it's a role that I take extraordinary pride in, but also I feel the weight of responsibility, and it's that much easier because of the work that you do. So I want to thank you for that. Have a fabulous afternoon. I will see many of you, I think, this evening at the awards evening. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you.